While the infiltrometer is working, we're going to go to work. And Keith, if you'll carry those things, we're just going to run this tape out 100 feet. And then what we like to do as range cons is at least go along every 10-foot mark and see what we have for plant diversity. Because out here it just looks like there's all brome, but once we start looking on a 10-foot process, we can probably see if there's more diversity out here or not. So we're just going to run this out 100 feet and then we'll work our way back. And there's nothing fancy about this, it's just a 100-foot meter. I like the kind of the fiberglass or plastic ones because it stands the wind and I can drag it across the grass if I have to. So this was the first pasture you grazed this spring. It was started June 1st, right?
Yep.
And the first rotation was what? How many days?
8 days.
Every 8 days. All right, so then the cows were out of here then June 8th, they're cow-calf pairs. And then they didn't come back here until about when, do you remember?
August 2nd, I'm sorry, August 2nd.
August 2nd, that's right. Because we wanted to have at least 45 days recovery. That's NRCS's protocol. Okay, so before we even look at the line, you guys, we can see some of our native species popping out here. So here we've got some porcupine grass. It's a cool season bunch grass, so it looks kind of bunchy, but it's got pretty good vigor. You know, look how long those leaves are. They're pretty wide leaves. It's a nice big bunch. This one's a little weaker, so you know what a good plant looks like versus one that's more in a degraded state. The critters look like they grazed, sweet clover tops. There's other forbs out here we'll look at. We have some Kentucky or some curly cup gumweed, which isn't surprising. That's just along with the brome. That just shows some level of degradation, but it is a native forb, so it has a taproot system versus the fibrous root systems. So we'll just kind of look back on this line. Let's go back here. There's 100 here at 90 feet, and we just kind of look at this area. Let me grab this. We just kind of, sometimes I like to use this as it's just kind of ruler to focus, get our focus in. When we start looking at more of a microscopic point, you guys, and then I like to bring in the discussion of the soil health principles, right? You guys know those really well on your no-till systems and your cover crop systems. So on rangeland, a lot of that's just given to us, right? The first principle of soil health is soil armor, right? And a lot of times on rangeland, like you do here, you have good armor, right? We've got litter laying flat on the surface. It's not long and too oxidized. It's kind of breaking down. It's available for our saprotrophic bacteria and fungi. There are decomposers when it comes to soil biology. And then another soil health principle that's given to us is obviously what's grazing out here, livestock, right? And then another soil health principle that's really important is to minimize disturbance. We're not out here farming the land, right? Sometimes there's times to apply disturbance, like hoof action maybe, and other times not to. But really, when we're talking about the biogeochemical process within our rangeland, the other two really important principles that we've already mentioned is what? Plant diversity and active living root.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, and so diversity, when we look at this brome grass stand, that when we did the assessment, it was about 64% smooth brome grass, which I think NRCS says anything over 30% is at a degraded state, and it's really hard to reverse that plant community back to anything that's more native. But we're already seeing that, we're changing that, right? And so I'm just kind of looking in here. Predominantly, we have the lead tillers. That the brown ones up here are the smooth brome grass lead tillers. Remember, there's 3 sets of tillers during the growing season. There's the primary tiller, the secondary tillers, and the fall tillers, right? Okay, and the secondary tillers, the plant's objective is just to produce a seed head, and they go dormant, right? So it's only going to produce like 2 to 3 tillers a year plus its lead tiller. But as land managers, we have the wisdom to understand that if we can manipulate this plant and stop it from producing a seed head, it releases the hormone cytokinin, and that plant can produce 5 to 8 new tillers a year. So when we go from 2 to 3 tillers to 5 to 8 new tillers a year, that's serious increased production. So if one of your goals was increased production so you don't have to rent other land, or increase production so you can expand your cow herd or sheep herd or something, then that's serious production. And have we seen that last couple of years? Those secondary tillers?
Yes.
And the other neat thing about secondary tillers is what's the difference just in color? Yep, no photosynthesis on this plant that went dormant, and photosynthesis that's happening during the second tillering phase. Also, the secondary tiller, once it has 3.5 leaves on it, it can live on its own. It's no longer nursing off of the parent plant. And so it's producing nutrients that a lot of the industry that isn't into the biological effective grazing, they're losing about 16% of their cash crop. So equivalent of about $134 per calf on the ranch, but not capitalizing those nutrients right there. So it's dollars and cents also. The only other thing I really see in here right now in this spot, guys, is some sweet clover. There's some sweet clover down here. It's a biannual, pretty much smooth brome grass, maybe a few Kentucky bluegrass plants. We're well armored, and yeah, we're just going to try to change things for the soil bugs. We need living root, we need photosynthesis. So let's go look at another spot here. And we're not going to go through the full-fledged example, but until I see something different. Some things that we see here in October. So we came back here in August and grazed. We grazed the first time for 8 days. The second time our idea was just to double those days, right? So we grazed for about 16 days the second time.
Yep.
And with that effort, the first rotation is to allow the animals to defoliate only 25 to 30% of the plant. And that's really important. Why?
So we maintain photosynthesis.
Yep.
And the plant's regrowth off photosynthesis versus the roots.
Correct. Yep. And there's been really good work done back in the 50s by Kreider and Johnson. And a lot of times, we've seen those slides in presentations of poor root, poor shoot, really good healthy root, healthy shoot, and the difference. And that was a proper grazing use study. And we found out that take half, leave half is proper grazing use. But what we know even better now is if when we take off 25 to 33% before the plant flowers, it keeps that plant in full photosynthesis mode, feeding the soil organisms, reproducing through secondary tillers, adding production and more photosynthesis, capturing more carbon out of the air, and creating a habitat for the soil organisms, but also for the bees and the butterflies and the birds, and don't forget about the bats. They're really important too. And so it's just all happening together. It really makes ranching or farming fun again. I mean, when you really understand how that all works. So again, we have porcupine jumping out here. Okay, so we found some porcupine grass here. It's a bunch grass again, so it's kind of sticking up in here. We have a lot of things. We have Kentucky bluegrass, is really narrow leaf. We have some smooth brome grass, secondary tillers down here, really wide leaf. And then, but we can see the difference. These long, green, slender leaves. That's a real nice indication of a needle grass, like a green needle grass or porcupine. This one's porcupine. So then we could look vegetatively. We could look at where the leaf meets the stem. And somebody might say, well, where's that seed head? Well, part of the biological effect of grazing was to graze the growing points off to produce more secondary tillers. Remember the oxen story? And so these plants are staying in a vegetative state. Here we're at October 14th. They're nice and long and green. It's cloudy today, but even with the shorter days we have here, that's still photosynthesis happening. Not unlike the cover crops, downslope on our cropland. We're going to capture as much photosynthesis as long as we can. The secondary tillers, a lot of cattle people or ranchers are going to know that if we went out here in January or February, we're going to find green tillers. And so long as they're not covered with snow or something, that is essential mineralization that's going to the soil organisms. And that part of it we really need to appreciate. So this long leafed one here is porcupine grass and green needle grass. This one's smooth brome grass. From a production standpoint, as far as tillers go, you can see there's a lot more vegetation here available for a cow to eat versus this one. Plus it's higher off the ground, so we can maintain higher stubble heights for a mix of small songbirds as well as game birds like sharp-tailed grouse. All right, so when we talk about indicator species, it depends on what the indicator we're looking for. And in a smooth brome grass invaded native rangeland, a lot of times what we're seeing using other tools like fire or high intensive rotational grazing, a lot of hoof action and things like that, what we're seeing is big blue stem shows up. Big blue stems, warm season grass. It's an ice cream plant. People love it. We love to see it. It's a tall grass species. It's usually the first one to see. So when we see a cool season native show up in a predominantly smooth brome grass invaded patch, from that standpoint, it's a positive indicator because we have cool season natives, not just brome and a native warm season. It adds to the diversity. It adds to the earlier feeding of the soil organisms next spring. And so I have a good friend over here in Gregory County. He asked me, do you sleep with that shovel? And I say, well, I carry it around a lot, but I finally put rhizosphere on here because I'd say it to people and producers or in groups, and I think it's just, rhizosphere, what is that? So I finally spelled it and put it on here, and plus it reminds me, if I look at it every day, it reminds me of what I'm really passionate about. I need to be frank, and what I tell people in real live audiences, and this is one I guess, is I've got a 28-year career and I could potentially be done with my federal service in 2 years. And so I'm using every opportunity I can with 28 years of practical experience. I've got livestock at home too. I studied this my entire career. I did a literature review on the rhizosphere last year on work other than Dr. Mansky's, and he's got over 30 years of work that supports it, and 30 years prior to that of range science people out of Dickinson Research Extension Center that he's following. And if we don't get the rhizosphere right, folks, we're not going to have a ranch to transfer on to the next generation. We seriously won't. And we hear the no-tillers saying that, right? They've been no-tilling for 30 years. We know it takes about 4 years to, for the soil to kind of get right. In rangeland management, it's not much different. It's going to take Van and Heath, 4 to 5 years before we really see some really exciting things. Now, we got to capture a point in this experiment because it hailed July 15th of 2019. And that did something very magical for the biological world. And once you understand how that functions and works, then you see it as a very positive thing and you capitalize on it. How are we going to manage this then into the future to capitalize on that moment of hail, severe hail? So let's look at the rhizosphere. We're looking at porcupine grass. So the indicator you might be referring to is so what's the rhizosphere? I'm going to show you that. And there's four main key species that I found it on. Do we know this? Well, I know of someone that knows this, and when I went to ask him, and he's my mentor, I said, so just tell me list me the species that I can go look for the rhizosphere. He says, it's not that easy. He says, they all have a rhizosphere if they're healthy. I said, well, what are the main key ones? Well, he told me western wheatgrass, and then he said, go look. And I learned better that way than if he would have just told me. So that made me dig a lot more holes. And so, for cool season species, western wheatgrass, porcupine grass, warm seasons, it's Sidotes grama, which is my favorite, and prairie sandreed that will usually have remnants of rhizosphere. So once we look at it, on most rangeland, we'll find it within the top 4 inches. Top 4 inches of the soil, which is also the perfect environment for bluegrass and brome, all right? So we're measuring, when we do soil evaluations, we're measuring down to 24 inches because we want that root rhizosphere to go deep and dense, and that takes more roots. Okay, so there's a lot of fun stuff to look at here. You guys better get close. And so, a lot of things, if you do this long enough, just the sheer force of me breaking this up, is telling me things, because I've learned, is there much bulk density here? Not too much. There's not real good root mass because it's just breaking off right here, right? So we're going to get in that 2 to 4 inch zone. So things aren't perfect here, and we're going to see that from the air that we have room to grow here. But the cool things here is that we have living roots. We have white roots, right? Living roots. We don't have a bunch of dark brown ones or black ones that are dying, even though we want some of that to build organic matter. We need to build organic matter more than what we have, so there's those things. But what we're looking for is rhizosphere. And it may or may not be present. Usually when it gets drier, you end up breaking them off and tearing them off without them really being there. But what the rhizosphere will look like, and Dr. Christine Jones out of Australia, she refers to it as the rhizo sheath. And so the agronomists see this a lot. We could go down, if you had some oats in your cover crop, and find it. But it'll make like a little coat, or the root will be, there'll be just soil stuck to the root as a result of
Glomalin.
glomalin and exudates being excreted from the soil roots, right? And so that's really exciting stuff. And so once we have that rhizosphere in the root system, it's like the apartment complex for really good bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi. And that's where they live. They need habitat, right? So we're really good at building habitat for our cows. We're really good at building habitat really for wildlife too. Pheasant openers this weekend, right? You guys are involved with that. And so we need habitat for our soil organisms. And when we appreciate that they're there and they're not, if we don't get that rhizosphere back on there, flat, frankly, because we're going to go broke. Everybody's saying it. Dr. Jim White, he does a lot of work with bacteria in the rhizophagy cycle. Dr. Christine Jones, I understand if she can make it, she might make it via Zoom. Nicole Masters is going to be talking to the Grassland Coalition folks in December for their annual meeting. Gabe Brown, we're all basically saying that if we don't get our soil right, it's just going to be dysfunctional. So anyway, what I'm finding here is I'm not finding a rhizosphere. We'll find one for you before we're done. But there's other things I'm looking for here. So I'm looking for secondary or fall tillers, fall tiller buds. Bunch grasses, it's not always so easy, but they'll just look like little spurs coming off.
I'm such a geek. I've been smiling all morning. Sorry.
It's reassuring though. I
Cool
appreciate
stuff.
that. So, I mean, this isn't a good one, but there's one right here coming out. That's going to be a tiller for next year, but they're weak. So what do we do the rangeland health assessment for as range cons? Is to assess the land, put a grade on it, and determine whether it's healthy or whether it's not, if it's departing from historic plant community or not. And basically what we found here is the soil's stable, the hydric soil is broken, that's why we're running an infiltrometer. We're looking at the soil structure, it could be improved. This is just blocky structure, this isn't aggregates. When I show you healthy aggregates, you'll see the difference. And our biotic component isn't right. We have a dysfunctional functional structural group because it's predominantly smooth brome grass. We don't have good plant community, which is an indicator that shows that we're departing from historic plant community. Infiltration, and then the soil organism side of it. Sorry I couldn't find you a rhizosphere in that one, but we'll find one. I wish we had some western, it'd really show up on that.